Test. 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 Welcome in. Welcome in. If you're live here, type where you're tuning in from. Okay, so if you're live, type where you're tuning in from. Tonight is not a motivational talk, right? So tonight is going to be about clarity. Have you ever told yourself you were being wise, but deep down you knew you were just afraid? Have you ever said, I need more time, I need more clarity, I'm still preparing? It's not the right season. And if we're honest, it wasn't preparation, it was protection. Tonight, we're actually exposing the disguise, right? Because a lot of people are using that as an excuse, right? And we'll talk a whole lot more about that as we continue here, right? So fear doesn't sound like fear, right? It doesn't sound like that. So in all honesty, fear rarely says I'm scared. Fear says I'm being strategic, right? That's where you get the, oh, I'm taking my time because I need to get more information or I need more data, right? So Lady T Purdy, I see you, friend. Welcome in. Thank you so much for stopping in and sharing it out, right? So that's what ends up happening. We get into that mindset, that framework, if you would, right? Where it doesn't fit fear is rarely scared, right? It says I'm being strategic. You guys hear me talk about that a lot, right? And so if you're intelligent, fear doesn't show up loud. It shows up reasonable, right? And we're going to talk about three disguises that fear uses, right? The first one is disguise number one. I need more information, right? And sometimes you don't really need more information. What you actually need is more courage, right? You actually need to have that push, that motivation, something that's going to tell you, okay, you need to go beyond or past, this fear essentially, right? So the gathering more data phase, it hits a lot of us, in many different ways. And I remember telling a story in one of my previous lives that, like my wife Michelle, she really is, really good at this, right? And I know she won't mind me saying this, right? She's gonna see this video anyway, right? She's gonna see this content. But essentially, what ends up happening is when we get into that mindset or into that phase of, well, I'm looking for more information, it can sound, like it's a cop out essentially, right? Like I'm just gonna say I need more information when in all truth and fact, I'm running scared, right? I'm running scared because number one, I probably don't want to do the thing that I'm trying to accomplish. And we're creating ourselves the defense mechanisms to say, wait a minute, I may not feel like I'm ready to do this, right? I'm now in the mindset or in the frame of mind that says I don't really understand, where I should be going because I don't have clarity on alignment. I'm not quite aligned to where I need to be, right? And so what ends up happening is we put the barrier or we create this defense mechanism before us. And what we do is we tell ourselves the lie has to first be towards us, right? We have to be the first ones to believe the lie, right? And so what we do is we create those that defense mechanism essentially to say, wait, I'm going to use these excuses, right? Or a disguise, right? So disguise is essentially just saying you're using an excuse, right? So we can say ouch to that one, right? Because that's what ends up happening. And I'm only bringing this up because I'm not saying that I've never been through this kind of a situation, right? The reason I'm even talking about this topic tonight is exactly that, right? So Lady T Purdy says the lie is the barrier of so-called protection as an excuse, right? Absolutely. That's what it is. It's disguising or it's putting on that mask essentially, right? So now to create that protection for us so that way we feel more comfortable about the decision that we made or the disguise or the lie that we tell ourselves or the excuses that we put forth, right? So that's the first disguise. I need more information. Now, am I saying there's something wrong? There's anything wrong with gathering more data? No, because you have to be in that mindset where you have to use the thought process of I'm going to make decisions, but the decisions need be data driven, right? Because if you're making an uninformed decision, then more than likely, you're going to find yourself in a trap, right? This is where sometimes we get scammed. We get scammed, right? Because we believe or we're so trustworthy or we're so trusting of what the information that we're seeing before us without actually vetting that information to determine is it really truth or is it just someone just trying to put a fast one on you essentially, right? And so what ends up happening is we keep saying, okay, well, I need more information, I need more data, I need more this, I need more of that, right? And so what we're doing is we're procrastinating even further along. So now we're now stretching the boundary. We're stretching the limits now. We're so further away from the thing that we're supposed to accomplish that now it has so disguised itself and it has created a barrier. And what that barrier does, right? We all know if you've seen sometimes they do this in when there's police chases, right? They do these especially if you're going into a secured location, they have these barriers where you cannot enter, right? Especially if they have advance notice, they'll put the barrier up to prevent you from going through, right? From penetrating that wall or penetrating that the fence line or whatever it is that they're trying to keep away from you, right? So that's what it is. We create those disguises, right? And sometimes we don't really need more information. What we need is more courage. And so what exactly does that look like, right? So courage is going to come over time. I'm not Courage is not the absence of fear, right? We do that to ourselves because of rejection, right? Yes, that's one of them. Absolutely. So rejection could be one of the reasons why, right? Because maybe we've tried this thing so many times. We've tried it over and over and over again, and we're not really getting the results that we expected. And so we're like, well, why am I going to even try again? I tried it this way. I tried it 17 different ways from Sunday, and it's still not working. And so we're like, well, I already tried that. So I'm not going to try that again because I'm going to be rejected. Right. So absolutely. That could be one of the reasons as well. And so courage is not the absence of fear. A lot of times people think that, oh, I'm courageous or I'm brave, right? And the reason why that is because I don't have any fear. That is so far from the truth because as courage actually courage is you're recognizing and you understand that there is that level of fear that is there, but you have made a decision. You've made the decision in your mind to say, wait a minute, in spite of the fact that I'm afraid of this, I'm going to go ahead and take this risk or I'm going to try this out because you that's how you're going to gather your data, right? If you keep trying it over and over again, maybe you give yourself a limit. You say, I'm going to try this 3 times. If after the third time it doesn't work, then I'm going to try something else. Right. So there you just gathered more data as well. So the data is constant information that's going to be coming to you that's going to help you gain more clarity on making a decision. And that's going to be the thing that helps us to really get outside of making those excuses or disguising ourselves, and creating those barriers for us, right? We have to be very mindful of that. The second disguise that we use is I'm waiting for confirmation, right? For those of us that are, whether you're a faith leader or you're big in faith or spirituality, right? That's one of the things that we're always saying, right? And when I'm on different platforms and I'm doing lives on spirituality, this is one of the main ones that actually comes up, right? This is where I'm looking for confirmation. I will use myself for example. I always say if something is meant for me to do, or or a step that is meant for me to take, I'm going to get confirmation in threes. And so what ends up happening is I look for those, people say, well, you look for the signs, right? Like, but it's like essentially that's what you're doing, right? Because you want to make sure that you're on the right path, right? And so what ends up happening is sometimes what we do is we say, okay, well, okay, how do you know that the confirmation is there unless you're stepping out on faith? If you didn't step out on faith to say, look, I'm going to try this thing so I can get the confirmation, you have to be in the right environment to be able to receive that information, right? And Lady T. Purdy says the data gives you the substance to help us pinpoint what works and removes barriers. Absolutely, right? Absolutely. The information that we're looking for, if we're not present in that moment to be able to receive the confirmation, then the confirmation is going to be null and void, right? Because you're not, there is no level of expectation. There is no spirit of expectancy there, because you're like, oh, I'm just kind of going through life, and you're not really having that spirit of expectation that's actually going to say to you, wait a minute, I want you to look here, right? Or maybe it could be through a conversation, right? Maybe there's people or ideas that would come to you, and then you start to put those things into motion, right? There, you're going to have to do some kind of activity or some kind of work to make sure that you're actually demonstrating that you believe that this thing is going to work, right? So that's the second disguise. I'm waiting for confirmation, right? And if I don't get it in threes, that means, it's not something that I need to move forward with, right? You just don't trust yourself yet, because you already know. A lot of the times we already know, we already know that it is the right thing to do, but we don't trust ourselves enough. So that's why we put up those barriers, or we create those disguises, right? To keep us even further behind, right? Being even more, procrastinating even more. And so we've got to really consider those things. You already know within your heart of hearts sometimes, but you're like, you know what? I'm just waiting for confirmation, right? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but maybe at that moment you don't really trust yourself. So how do you overcome that? Right? You've got to be able to take that next step, which is going to require that courage that you need, right? In order to say, look, against all odds, or in spite of, or the hashtag no matter what, moment that you're experiencing, is like, look, no matter what, I'm going to try this, right? I'm going to put myself out here and see what actually works. And then the third disguise is I'm being patient, right? Patience is powerful, but delay can wear spiritual language, right? Let that sit for a little bit. Patience is powerful, but delay can wear spiritual language, right? So it's not that you're being patient, you're actually delaying the progress. And so with the lack of motivation, now you're thinking, wait a minute, how do I actually overcome? How do I, bypass this, procrastination or this delay, right? Because fear in smart people sounds responsible because of all of those things that I mentioned, right? So the first disguise is I need more information. Number two is I'm waiting for confirmation. And then number three, patience is, or I'm being patient, right? I'm just waiting to see what happens. I'm going to delay it, for 6 months, and then 6 months turns into 6 years, and then 6 years turns into, 60 years. And then by the time you know it, right, like you have no more room to expand or to experience the next level. So those are the things that we need to keep in mind, right? So we're talking about fear doesn't sound like fear, right? It doesn't sound that way, right? It sounds very logical, and this is the thing that's keeping us stuck in 2026, right? Here we are in February, so we're only in the second month of the year, almost going into March, and what ends up happening is we are the thing that we're negotiating in our minds is like it sounds very logical, right? Like those three disguises, they sound very logical, but those are the things that are keeping us stuck. And if we're not able to clear that, what's going to end up happening to us, right? We've got to really start to bear down and say, wait a minute, do I really want to go from, where I am right now, and what steps is it going to take for me to get to that next level, right? Right. So I appreciate you. If you guys are just coming in, type in the chat, like, where are you from, right? Where are you chiming in from tonight, right? Oh, we fancy. Let's go. I'm here. Let's go. Let's talk about it. 134. I appreciate you for coming in. Thank you so much for stopping in. I appreciate you. right? So if you're just coming in, we're talking about this amazing topic called fear sounds like logic. And that's the thing that's keeping us stuck in 2026, right? We're in the second month of the year. And if we're continuing to disguise the fear or we're as logic, then we're using three disguises to do that, right? So the first one I talked about was I need more information, right? It sounds like an excuse, but in our mindset, we've already sold ourselves a bill of goods to say, well, I need more information, right? And then you need more information. You're constantly looking for more information. But really, what you need is courage. You need to just take that next step so that way you can continue to get more information or you can have more data that's going to be a data driven type of next step that you're going to take moving forward, right? So if you're just coming in, I appreciate you for stopping in. You can share this out to your friends. I know this is a different platform than what I'm used to doing, on Friday evenings, right? So if you're in here and you're excited, let us know where you're coming in from tonight, right? What state are you from? Right? And then the second disguise we talked about is I'm waiting for confirmation, right? I need the three the three confirmations. I need some three different people to say, you know what, I've been thinking, right? We were looking for this spiritual awakening to say, oh, thus saith the Lord, you shall do this, right? And then foaming at the mouth and doing all these things, right, to get our confirmation. But sometimes it could be the subtlest of things. It's not always going to be like, fire and brimstone and audible voices coming to you, right? You will begin to become sensitive to the environment, to become sensitive to the spirit, everything that's going on around you, that will actually tell you, because deep down on the inside, sometimes we already know that this is the next step we need to take. We just don't trust ourselves yet, right? And then the third thing we talked about, disguise number three, is I'm being patient, right? You're waiting for 6 months, you're delaying it, right? For 6 months, it becomes 6 years, and it just continues, right? So we've got to consider those things. All right. So it says, let's see here, friends. So who is this from Atlanta? Lady T Purdy, A1 from Day One from Atlanta, Georgia. We got ATL in the room tonight, right? I appreciate you guys, right? And so that's it, right? So the three disguises. Now we're gonna transition over into talking about why smart people stay stuck, right? You're not stuck because you're incapable, right? A lot of the times we have the full capability to do the thing that it is that we want to accomplish, but we're stuck because we can see all the risks, right? You start to have those what if questions, right? What if I step out here and I do this and it doesn't work? How are you going to know if it works if you never try it, right? Life is all about taking risks. You guys hear me talk, excuse me, about the analogy, right? Where you're like, you don't sit on a chair, right? I don't see, a lot of us aren't doing this. When maybe after you guys heard me talk about it in the live, then all of a sudden you're like checking the seats now to see if you can actually sit on it without falling, right? But a lot of us, we don't do that, right? We can go to a restaurant and we just pull the chair back and we sit down, right? We never check right? It's like when was the last time this chair was maintenance, right? A lot of us are not walking around doing that, right? But if you look at it from that perspective, and I know it's kind of bringing it down into simplicity, right? I like simplicity and I like clarity, right? I don't like a lot of fluff. But essentially, what it is, if we're looking at it from that perspective, then why are we, when it comes time for us to make these maybe tough decisions, right, or decisions that's going to push us forward, why are we continually second guessing ourselves, right? We don't do that when we sit on the chair. That could be monumental, right? Like you could actually just say, you know what, I'm, to the winds, and I'm just going to sit down, and then the chair gives way, right? And then what happens? That is catastrophic. But we don't do that when we're looking at the decisions in our life, right? So sometimes we've got to really kind of say, you know what, I got to get out of that mindset. It really starts with our mind. It's what exactly are we telling ourselves, right? Are we lying to ourselves, right? That's really essentially what it is. We're constantly lying to ourselves. We're telling ourselves the story until we start to believe it, right? And then you create what's called that echo chamber. It could be you in your head, or it could be a bunch of people in your circle, right? People that you know, like, and trust, or maybe they're your frenemies, right? You don't really like them, but they're there, and there's one more person in the circle, right? So you've got to keep that in mind as well, right? Because sometimes that within itself is a risk, because you've just exposed yourself, right? So the smart people stay stuck because They can see all the risks, right? That I'm not going to sit on the chair because what if the chair breaks? Or I'm not going to drive over the bridge, because what if the bridge collapses, right? Like that's something that's constantly going in my head, right? Because sometimes I do go over bridges. And I'm like, oh my God, what if, because you hear horror stories and you see all these crazy things that happen, right? But you know what? After you cross that bridge, then you're of a different mindset now, right? You have crossed that hurdle, right? Because you again didn't go underneath the bridge to check the stanchions to see like is it crumbling, like what does the foundation look like, right? Where none of us are doing that, right? We're having faith and we're moving forward. So that's exactly the message for tonight, is to demonstrate to us that we can move forward, right? We got to take those risks sometimes, right? We always see the downside before the upside, right? So back, so a little bit of my background, right? So I did also study social psychology on my undergraduate studies, right? And essentially, what ends up happening is like our mind automatically goes to the negative. That's why there's authors out there that write books about rewiring your mind, right? Those because we're wired to think a certain way based on our experience, right? So we may have had an experience with something, and then we're using that data to drive the next step, the next decisions that we make. So let's say, for example, right, like growing up as a kid, you put your finger in the socket, or you put a fork or a spoon or a piece of metal in there, right? And it's depending on what kind of family you grow up in, right? Sometimes they'll let you go ahead, right? They say, okay, we're gonna watch this and see what happens, right? They give you the leverage. They say, okay, let's see what happens next. Go ahead and do it, right? I'm not condoning that. I'm not saying that anyone should ever do that, right? But there's some lessons that need to be learned after that happens. And so what ends up happening is sometimes you let them go through those steps so that way they can learn that lesson. The other thing is, or you could say, wait a minute, no, 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 don't do that. And then sometimes that first message doesn't go through, right? So they're going and they're putting the finger in the socket, and then we're like, oh, I got to pull back because this doesn't feel right, right? That initial shock that you get from making that decision, but that is a risk you are willing to take, right? But essentially, the downside is what we see first, right? Like if I put my finger in it, well, in that case, yes, you probably don't want to do that, right? But it's like, what if I'm supposed to start this business, or I'm supposed to support someone in this community, or I'm supposed to, give to someone, right? Like we always saying, well, that person is like, I'll tell you this perfect example, right? And this is kind of a crazy example. I remember we were visiting some place in Philadelphia, right? We were going to like one of the scenes, the sites in Philadelphia, right? And I remember it was my wife and my grandkid at the time, and we were like, just kind of walking around and looking at the different sites. And we walked past this homeless person, right? And he was like, "Hey, you got a dollar, right?" And I didn't have a dollar with me at the time, right? I typically don't walk around with cash, right? And so it's like, no, I told him, hey, I don't have it. He's like, I know you got it, right? Like he's like, I know you got it. I'm like, well, wow, you're in my bank account, you're in my pocket, like I got it. Then okay, well, it first of all, it's my dollar to give if I had it, right? And I'm like thinking to myself, like, Philly, I'm telling you, Philly, they're a interesting kind of people, right? But and you guys know I have undiagnosed ADHD, so I'm probably gonna lose the train of thought. I probably already lost the train of thought, right? But it's like, what you are telling me, right? Yes, we are. Right? Like and I'm still trying to chase the memory of why I was going on that rabbit hole, right? But if you guys can bring me back on, right? And then we'll probably tell the rest of that story. But it's like, we're looking at it from that perspective. Oh, so it's talking about social psychology, right? So we're always constantly looking at the negative of things. And so what ends up happening is, and I still don't remember where I was going at. I'm just gonna move on to the next point, right? So the other thing is, and the intelligence without courage becomes paralysis, right? Because what ends up happening is you have all the data, you already have all the information, right? But you didn't have the courage, and now you're paralyzed because you're stuck. You're now stuck in your head, right? You're playing the negative soundtracks, essentially, right? You guys have heard me talk about this before. You're constantly playing the negative soundtracks. You're like, wait a minute, you got it on repeat. It's now your favorite song, right? You're like, oh man, woe is me. I can't do this. if I do this, if I submit this package again, they're gonna look at me. I'm gonna get rejected, right? I'm just constantly getting rejected, 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 right? And I know it sounds easier said than done, but it's like, and there is actually no but. It does sound easier said than done. When we start to change our mindset, then we'll be able to not become paralyzed, because if after we've done the data, right? We've gotten all the data, but why are we continuing to use or make the same choices or the same decisions with that data? My middle name, right? Right? So I'm gonna go back to the finger in the socket example, right? You went in, you put your finger in the socket, you got shocked the first time, right? And you're like, wow, that felt kind of strange. I probably don't want to do that again, right? But then something on the inside of us tells us, wait a minute, it wasn't so bad. Maybe I could go back and do it again, right? Let's try it again, right? We're like, yes, I need to try this again. And then we go back, and then it's like, wait a minute, that's the same kind of reaction, right? Like that felt bad. I shouldn't do that again, right? And then we graduate. We're like, well, let me go put it on the stovetop this time, right? When it's blazing fire, and then we put the hand on it, and it's like, oh, that burned, right? And it's like, when, at what point are we going to actually learn the lesson, right? Maybe now we have to take that information and say, wait a minute, I probably shouldn't be doing that. Maybe I could find a different way or find a different avenue, a different direction, and say, wait a minute, instead of putting my, making the same mistakes over and over again, how about I just don't even do that again? And then find a different thing to do that is going to be exciting and brand spanking new, right? Why would we want to keep doing the same thing over and over again? All right, I'm gonna get off that point, right? So what ends up happening is you can research yourself out of destiny, right? I'm gonna share this with you, right? So I have yet to do my review on this company too, right? So I'm very, I consider myself to be very risk averse. But the reason why I can talk about this topic tonight, because I too was the person that kept putting my finger in the socket, right? I'm like, wait a minute, I keep doing that, right? And it's like I would get, disappointed, or I would get scammed from doing something, right? Or something will happen, and I'm like, well, man, you should have learned your lesson from the last time that you did that, right? It's a different scenario. So it's not like it's the same, I'm doing the same thing over and over again, right? I might put my risk out there, right? And I'll do that risky thing. And then I'm like, oh, well, I got burnt there. I'm not gonna do that again, right? Then I choose a different path and I do that. And if it's the scam happens again, it's like, wait a minute, why am I constantly getting scammed? It may not be the exact same thing, but what's really happening? And is it because I'm not doing the full research, right? And it's like, what if, but the last thing that I got scammed on, it wasn't really a scam, because if you really pull back the onion, right? All the work that went into it, I paid for that. I paid for all of that work to happen, right? And maybe they overpromised and under-delivered, but I still gleaned something from that, right? Like the product was delivered, but the continuing relationship ended, right? Because it turns out that that aspect of it was a scam, right? But now I'm filled with information right now, so that the lessons that I'm learning, I'm now able to share it with other people, right? And so that's the part that we've really got to consider. Now I have the information. What am I going to do with that information? Am I going to hold on to it, or am I going to share it so that way other people can learn from it, so that way they can become unstuck? So that they think the thing that they're thinking about logically in their mind, there needs to be an intervention, right? So that intervention is someone breaking the cycle of what we're calling logic, the thing that is keeping us stuck. And then when we're not exposed to different types of platforms or different environments, then sometimes we're not going to get the data. We're not going to get the information that we need to make the next step going forward, right? So hopefully that makes sense, right? So we're still talking about fear, how it sounds like logic, and this is what's keeping us stuck in 2026, right? So we still have some time. We're only in the first quarter of the year, right? So we're in quarter one of calendar year 2026, right? We're getting ready to go into the third month, right? So we've got to start getting unstuck now, so that way we can the rest of the outlook for the rest of the year going into the second quarter, third and fourth, so on and so forth. Right, we've got to be prepared now and remove those barriers and get unstuck now, so that way we can be prepared to take on the next level of where we need to go, right? And so we don't want to take risk, right? So sometimes that's what it is. We look at the negative first before we can see the upside, right? Because again, social psychology teaches us that the mind automatically goes to the negative, right? And then we start to research it, and then we're researching. The next thing you know, 6 months, you didn't make any progress because we're constantly researching it, right? Yes, you can get the theoretical foundation, but then now it's time for you to start doing the field testing, right? This is one of the things that I learned when I was going through my doctoral dissertation. I was researching, and it was like, okay, well, the chair was like, at this point, you've done all the research. Now you need to move to the next step, which is now you're going to gather all that data and you're going to test it out. You're going to get a sample size of 10 people, and you're going to test out your research that you're trying to get a response for, right? So your research questions, you need to start getting answers to that to determine the feasibility of the thing that you're researching, right? So research is not just research. There are steps, right? Um, Thematic analysis. There's a whole lot that goes into there, but that's not what this live is about. But essentially, that's what we want to we want to get ourselves into that framework to say, wait a minute, yes, I may be researching, but what is the blueprint? What is the outcome? Yes, we want to see what's happening theoretically, but we need to determine what it actually looks like in practice. Right? So those are the things that we've got to consider. The research is great, but it needs to go somewhere. There needs to be a destination for this, right? Your destiny is not going to sit back and wait until you get done with your research. You've got to actually you can logic your way out of your growth, right? So, right. So you guys know I'm passionate about this stuff, right? So I will put a question out there for those of you who want to answer this. Maybe you're not able to answer right now, but maybe you want to put it in the comment section after this live is reposted, right? So have you ever overthought something so much that you talked yourself out of it? Right? Have you ever overthought something so much that you talked yourself out of it? Right? I remember when I was starting to do live streaming, that was I was overthinking everything. Right? I was like, well, what if I go on there and nobody shows up? Right? And that's exactly what ended up happening. I went live and nobody showed up on the live. It was zero for like months, right? And even recently, right? I don't have my little things right here, right? Exactly, right? So it's like, okay, well, wait a minute, and then you're like thinking to yourself, right? You're overthinking it, and then you quit, right? Because you're like, nah, I'm not doing this live thing anymore. It doesn't work, because you went live one day, right? And zero people showed up, and then it's like, well, wait a minute, what's really going on here, right? I see you, Lady T. I see you that you're here, right? But looking at it from that perspective is like, wait a minute, you're gonna keep talking yourself out of stuff, like constantly doing that. And so we have to get to a point where we're like, you know what? Because a lot of us are uncomfortable in spaces that we prayed for, right? Because when purpose gets louder than comfort, right? That's what we got to start thinking about. We're gonna now switch to talking about purpose versus comfort. I don't think I'm gonna get all of this information out today, right? Because I do have another life to get to. But purpose over comfort, right? So comfort feels safe, right? You're wrapped up in this cloak of comfort. But what purpose does is it's a disruptor. It's gonna feel like it's disrupting everything about what you're used to, right? You're so used to having this you're so used to having the comforts of a certain environment that you become spoiled, right? It's like you're so used to it, right? Like every time grandma shows up or grandpa shows up, you got candy, right? But then when you're at your parents' house, when the kid is at the parents' house, it's like, no, you can't have any candy, right? And so like grandma, I got, and grandma and grandpa shows up and it's candy time, right? And it's like you get so used to that, you get spoiled, so you get comfortable, right? You're like you have that expectation, oh, candy, 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 grandma, happy time, right? But destiny gives you a different thing. This your purpose. It actually feels disruptive. What exactly do I mean by that, right? So the comfort protects your image, right? I'm so used to doing it this way, I'm going to constantly do it, right? But purpose risks that, right? And then your purpose is going to get louder than your comfort. And that's why you're going to feel like it's being disrupted, right? Because everything in your life is shifting. Some of us are comfortable in spaces that we prayed for. When I'm telling you, you ask God, God, I'm looking for this. It's like the one story, right? Where people it says let's talk about it, says moving forward, absolutely, right? It's like you get into the mindset where you're like, okay, well, I prayed for this thing, and it's like, or you find yourself in a body of water, right? And you just feel yourself drowning in that body of water, and then you're crying out for help, God, please help me, right? Then somebody comes by, and they have this canoe, and they have, all the equipment to get you out of that distress. But then you're like, no, I have an expectation. It needs to be grandiose, and I need to see God open up the heavens, and I need to see, like, I need to see like light coming from the heavens and the clouds parting, and all that, right? That is our expectation, and the unrealistic expectations that we have is what's keeping us stuck sometimes, right? We're not willing. We say, God, help me with this, right? And then when the solution presents itself, you're like, oh, well, that ain't what I was expecting. That ain't it. I didn't get that confirmation, right? Oh, I need two more people to come, right? And then the other person come, maybe the person who was an Olympic swimmer, they show up to try to, put piggyback on their back so they can take you out of one. No, 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 I don't want to do all that. That's not my expectation, right? Clouds got to open, and then the third person comes, and it's like a cruise ship, got all the amenities on there. But like, nah, that's not my thing. I'm not expecting that. And then next thing you know, you missed your moments. You missed the opportunity to move forward. You missed the opportunity because you were expecting something else. You didn't want to take the risk, right? The first one that came was satisfying enough. You could have gotten out of that situation, but you're like, nah, I'm gonna wait for the next one. That's not what I'm expecting, right? So we gotta look at it. So when your purpose feels disrupted, right? It's because you're in that phase where things start to shift. That's how you really know that you're actually driving towards your purpose. It's not going to be comfortable. We're not going to be, everything's not going to be hunky dory. It's going to challenge us sometimes. It's going to cause us to go beyond our comfort zone. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about purpose over comfort, right? Or why do we feel stuck? Because we get into the comfort zone. We get into comfort zone, and then we stay there, right? And then we're waiting for someone to bail us out of it because we are like so used to it. We've been in that situation for so long that it's like, oh, great, I should just stay here, right? Like the leper, right? I'm not gonna go deep into that, but you guys know what I'm talking about, right? Let's see here. I'm gonna wrap things up here. Right? I don't want to be late for my other podcast, but this is where I'm gonna close with this, right? This is where fear hides today, right? So for those of us who are note takers, right, you can jot this down, right? Let's get specific. So, what have you been delaying for 3 months, 90 days that you know you should move on, right? What is something that you've been delaying for the last 90 days? And we already know what it is. We know exactly what it is. We can just put our finger on it and we can call it out for what it is. But if we want to remain stuck, we're not going to pull it out, right? We're gonna hide it. So that's one of the places where the fear hides, right? We don't want to move on, right? So if you were able to pinpoint that thing, right, then you already know that you should move on it because you're like, oh, it's right there. But now you're looking for information, you're gathering data, right? Why so I'm just going to throw out some questions, you don't have to answer now, right? You can answer in the chat later on. So but why are we letting this delay for 3 months? Why are we delaying it? We have to be able to ask ourselves that question, right? What's the real hesitation? What is, in project management they talk about the root cause analysis, right? And so what ends up happening is you don't know because you've got to now start to dissect and gather the details to be able to put it up on a board and say, wait a minute, oh, I see what the problem is. It could be maybe your processes, right? From a project management perspective, maybe your process has 6 steps and maybe you could combine to 3 steps. You don't need all 6 steps. You could combine some of the steps to streamline your process. And that's what we're doing when we're processing, what our purpose is, and determining, look, am I willing to stay stuck and be stagnant, or do I want to actually move forward? Right? And then, so what's the worst case scenario in our minds? Because that's what it is, right? We're trapped in our mindset and we cannot get past it, right? So I'm gonna go over three things on how to break that cycle, right? Because I can't get to the rest of it. I'm already gonna be a few minutes behind, right? So, but how do you break it? Here's how you break the logical fear, right? You've got to decide publicly, right? So when you say it out loud, you remove the escape, right? So, but that's what I mean when you decide it publicly, right? You call it out. I've been holding back on making this next step for 3 months because of XYZ, right? You call it out, you give it a name, you put it out there. Now, the other thing you can do is you can set a deadline. You can say to yourself, wait a minute, it's already been 90 days. I've already gotten the data. I already know in my knower that I need to move on this, but I've been procrastinating. So you speak it out and then you jot it down. You create yourself a deadline, right? I don't know which side my board is, right? It's definitely not that side, but I'm gonna swing it here a little bit, right? Boom, and then I'm gonna put it back. There may be some sensitive information. I don't remember what I put on it, right? But essentially, now you're going to take that thing and you're going to break it down into baby steps, right? You're going to take incremental steps. You're not just going to try to get it all done in one fell swoop, because that's going to continue to discourage you and you're going to remain stuck, right? So decide publicly, say what it is, write it down, put it on some sticky notes where it's visible, right? Now you're going to say, okay, I have a deadline. So in the next month, I'm going to tackle these little things here, right? You made a decision, because if you don't make a decision, it's just a fantasy, right? So, but this live is more so for people who are purpose driven. They actually want to get unstuck. So if you don't want to get unstuck, then you shouldn't do any of these things, right? But you're going to move before your confidence arrives. I always tell you guys, your confidence is going to follow evidence, because when you show up, you're still, it's all about getting data again, right? You show up on the live, two people show up here, okay, boom, I can now make some adjustments, right? I can make an adjustment. Maybe the content I talked about that day didn't really pull a lot of people in to think about things, right? So you don't have to feel ready because you've never done it before. This is my second time showing up on YouTube live, right? The first one was with my wife, and now I'm doing this one solo, right? So you guys are probably going to see more of me on this platform than you do on the other platforms, all right? And that's why, because that's a decision that I made based on data. You see what I'm saying? Decision was made based on data. I didn't just like wake up one day and say, "Woo, I'm just gonna come over onto this platform." No, right? That was data, months and months and months of testing out the data, and then finally coming to a conclusion to say, "Wait a minute, I can make this my primary, and then I can still repurpose information." Right? So I don't want us to walk away, feeling stuck. We should be able to walk away from this and saying, you know what? I have the data now, right? Maybe my first time that I tried this, it didn't work. But now I can actually say, wait a minute, that didn't work. Let me try something new. Let me try something different, right? And we won't know that until we take that step. So that's how the confidence is going to get built, right? You've got to show up, you've got to start doing it, gather the information, right? Okay, so I think we are right at time. I appreciate each and every one for showing up and supporting. We got Lady T in the room. We've got Let's Talk About It 134 that's in the room, right? So if you guys are not connected to the folks that are currently in the room, I would highly encourage that you do so, right? Can't force you, can't tell you what to do. But I would definitely recommend it, right? So I'm gonna close out with this. Fear sounds intelligent, right? It only sounds that way, but purpose sounds urgent. If something in this life exposed you, that's a good thing. That means you're now aware. You have self awareness now. So don't leave this live inspired. I want us to leave here decided, right? You made a decision. You're like, wait a minute, okay, because you don't want to go into some in be exposed to information and say, oh, that was great, or oh wow, that was terrible. You want to be able to make a decision. Did this add value to you? Right? Eat the meat, spit out the bones, right? Pick the pieces that you think are relevant. right? But if this actually helped you, hit the like before you leave. And if you're not subscribed, this is what we talk about here, right? Leadership, identity, and purpose. So I will see you guys on the next live. I'll be live later tonight. Okay, Lady T is gonna be live later tonight. Awesome. I will be in Thursdays here live 5 p.m. Right. So please, please, please make sure that you are showing up and supporting. Right. So appreciate you guys, and I will catch you on the next one.